And I think a lot of people don't recognize what fuels them. Sometimes they're just going and they're like, I have to find motivation. But for me, I was always looking at the arts and then looking at people and looking at the world and my family and thinking about how fun this was for myself to just be able to play and literally and figuratively travel, whether it's you're walking around your city, you're taking the bus, you're on a plane to Russia. Like basketball has been able to be a vehicle to expand everything that I thought was possible. And then also to be a vehicle to actualize what I dreamed, you know?
Today, I'm so excited to have someone who I think story that you're really going to enjoy because it's one that is what I like to call jagged. It's something that is not just a straight line. It's really about what it means to be part of a journey. And so I'm really excited to introduce Greg Plater. How's it going, Greg?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm
I'm
doing
happy to be
well, man.
here.
Yeah, same here, same here. So I think I was sharing with you earlier about a guy who I have a lot of respect for. His name is Todd Rose. He's a Harvard professor that's done a lot of work around kind of looking at talent and skills and really about how we have different journeys towards how we cultivate that, even though society tries to create like these very kind of straight paths. And so I really thought your story was a perfect example of, what it means to kind of be on a journey that, and I would say this, that's actually interesting, that's interesting and that is kind of filled with the type of narratives that I would want to share, with anyone who wants to see what it means to grow and develop into something that they like. So I'm just so happy to have you here today.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. We've had a lot of conversations over the years, and both of us are always plotting and scheming and always looking to grow and evolve. So to be here and have this conversation and put it out to the world, what we've already done is like super exciting.
Exactly. So the first thing I would love to hear from you is how would you kind of describe yourself with respect to your profession, your career, your just what how would you identify that?
I'd say there's two ways I go about it. One is like who I am, and I think I try to walk the world as like a builder, a collector of information, learning about people and the world around me, and an explorer. I've traveled around the world, and I think all of those experiences in my life, where I come from, being the Pacific Northwest, living in California several times, and then being immersed in cultures around the world, it's like that's shaped a lot of who I am and who I've wanted to become, right? And then like what people have known me as has been an athlete, now uh, through basketball. That was my main, avenue. And then now I'm working as an art director. So I'm a creative, but then also I feel like going back to the building, it's like I think I'm creating a world that I want to live in, and then the careers that I'm in, the people I surround myself with, and how I live is a reflection of that.
That's great. It's interesting what you said because right now there's a lot of discussion going on around careers and really how we're kind of moving into this space where some call multi-hyphenated, other people call kind of hybrid titles, as one author has said. And so when I look at you have so many of these different aspects of yourself that really identifies what you have to kind of give. What would kind of be your hyphenated title, if anything, or hybrid title? Excuse me, I would say hybrid title.
Man, I mean, I usually just say multidisciplinary creative,
Okay.
just to, what kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
umbrellas everything under one box, because I don't, I'm self-taught, self-learned, I don't have any formal training when it comes to creativity or even basketball. Like I played my whole life, but I didn't grow up with a trainer. I was at the YMCA and the Boys and Girls Club trying and mimicking and observing other people and getting beat one on one and challenging people to one on one and playing with the grown men to try and get better. So I think, if anything, I would say I'm a student. I'm a student and I'm always learning. And then when I've collected enough information and resources, then I apply myself.
That's great. Well, I love that because I think that's really where the emergence is taking place right now when it comes to how we end up kind of describing ourselves. There's a scholar out there that's really speaking about what they call hybrid titles, and I think she would probably approve of the way you just described yourself because I think that's right on point there. So let's get into your journey here because I think it's so interesting. So you talked about being an athlete. How did athletics and basketball? How did it end up taking shape from being part of the YMCA or the Boys Club, Boys and Girls Club?
I think I was thinking about this today. It was like, I think about it all the time. It's like all the experiences I had, not just in basketball, but in sport, the amount of relationships I've built, the amount of failure I've had, the amount of fun that I've had, and experimentation with how I want to express myself as a player. Um, I would say it's like I really explored my identity and discovered like who I wanted to be. So, that sounds like, interesting thinking from a sports perspective, but it's like, a lot of what we do as athletes is really about expression. It's communicating who you are. And then when people see you move, they see you play, they hear you talk and, in interviews and um they might take a liking to you based on those things. So then to become those things, you have to like build yourself into who you are. And it was always about like finding joy. I think that was the main thing. And then on the other side, like seeing what impact I could make on people through basketball, right? Like I was always looking at, say Michael Jordan and people like that, who were making huge impact. And I was like, man, I want to be like that. So I was always training with the thought in mind that I would be the greatest player of all time, right? That was my mindset. I was like,
Absolutely.
I want to train to be the best, and I want to train by learning from the best and observing the best. But then that didn't just stop with basketball, and I think that's what really allowed me to build my skills to an elite level was that I was taking from greats in music and I was learning from comedians, um, and looking at fashion and art and using those to collectively build who I was as an athlete because I felt like those things became my fuel. And I think a lot of people don't recognize what fuels them. Sometimes they're just going and they're like, I have to find motivation. But for me, I was always looking at the arts and then looking at people and looking at the world and my family and thinking about how fun this was for myself to just be able to play and literally and figuratively travel, whether it's you're walking around your city, you're taking the bus, you're on a plane to Russia. Like basketball has been able to be a vehicle to expand everything that I thought was possible. And then also to be a vehicle to actualize what I dreamed, you know?
Well, it's interesting. I find it. You said something that really stood out there, and that is, because you did, you know, grow up in the Boys and Girls Clubs and the YMCA's, that so often in athletics now, you have kind of the AAU and this really kind of system that is training a lot of these elite athletes, and this is just in my opinion, but a lot of them, their games kind of look the same. So it's very interesting that you talk about how you took a non-traditional path and how that has really allowed for you to really be a little bit more expansive, to bring a little bit more context, into how you express yourself in basketball. So I would just love your feedback on that. I mean, what do you think about like today's athlete that is pretty much put into the system, at an early age, and play against the same players. There's a filtering system, and by the time they get to the NBA or even college, everyone knows each other so intimately.
Yeah, I think the one part that I wish players had more nowadays was the ability to really develop like their individuality as players and to not train and play the same way, right? Like it's you have to learn the fundamentals of the game,
Of
obviously,
course. But we
right?
we all do. I mean, that's just like as a kid, you learn the fundamentals, but then what is kind of the constructive way that life get to unfolds, where you get to really kind of show who you are as a player and express
Exactly.
person.
And so that makes me think about if we're putting this like path on how to we're basically training kids to become pros from the age of like 6 onward, right? And so if you're on a path like this could go deep, but
It's all good, man.
the thing that people don't understand about becoming a professional athlete that I've just from conversations and learning and hearing sports media talk about it is people don't understand the becoming, the journey up to, and then the present where you're in college, high level, and then you're in pro. They don't understand those pieces, and then the evolution of that when it's like, what do you do after? And so that's why I really wanted to make sure I emphasized where I got my inspiration from. It was all about what fueled me as an individual. Like the music that I listened to made me my rhythm unique, right? Like the players that I watched were ways that I felt like I could implement their style into my game in the swagger, whether it's how they dressed, how they talked, how they looked, how they carried themselves. I really observed and mimicked and then made my own from that. Versus nowadays, it feels like you see these players doing the same 4 moves and everybody's just
Exactly.
run and gun, shooting
Exactly.
threes
Yep.
and lay-ins, and they're like, oh, but the data says, but it's like basketball and culture is fluid and it's magic, and like you can't do machine learning on the soul. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why I feel like today's today's kids are a little bit at a disadvantage, even though the skill's higher, they're put on this linear path to become something. And so when you have a target and goal, that's what you're going to hit, right? But when you are playing as a kid, you're not thinking I'm going to become like when I was a kid, I wasn't thinking, oh, I'm going to become a pro in this way. It was like, I was pretty raw, right? Coming from Salem, Oregon, it's like
Sure.
you have to pick and choose and grab everything you can find that's going to contribute to who you are. You have to find people who are going to give you the learnings and the teachings, and they may not be the best player, but maybe they had something. So
For sure.
it's like a collective of really finding like who do you want to be as a player, and do you want to even be a pro? I think the fact that we decide that that's what you have to try to do at the beginning already starts us off on the wrong path. So then if you're already on the wrong path and you're not moving in the way that's fluid and natural for you as an individual, then like you're going to find a lot more bumps in the road because there's going to be hindrances at um like what's the reason you're doing it, what's the purpose. If you're doing it for your parents, if you're doing it for the coach, if you're doing it to look a certain way or to have something or to show, it's like if that's not your truth, then it's really at the end of the day it's gonna go wrong. You know what I'm saying?
No, I think that's a good point, because actually, the metrics for engaging in team sports, for such a long time, especially, when your parents put you into things, was really for you to learn team concept, how to have a sense of resilience and stick to itness, all of these things that we would call metacognitive skills. These things that really help you kind of build a foundation for really kind of how to engage in life, whether that's in work, whether that's in whatever aspect of your life. So I think that definitely we have over-indexed too much on how we look at how we change the metrics, which is really about how you perform relative to getting to the pros.
Yeah.
So that
Yo,
becomes the deal there.
that makes me think about, like, I had this idea, and this is what Kobe was kind of on before, rest in peace, was
Yeah,
kind of on before he passed with the Mamba Academy, right? Like, he was teaching the game from a storytelling standpoint. He was teaching the game from a
absolutely.
fundamental standpoint. Like, it doesn't matter if you're a boy or girl, you need to learn how to use both hands. You need to learn the value of teamwork, how to communicate with others, right? How to embrace failure and have the right mentality to have a short-term memory to improve and learn from your mistakes and embrace those, right? And so that's the part, to me, what came to mind when you said that. It's like that those fundamentals are so core, not just to becoming a proper player and multifaceted player who can do it all, which is, again, that's the players who are thriving, right? But then you think basketball for me was always a reflection of the society, meaning like the individualism, the exceptionalism.
Yep.
And then nowadays we're back to like the 70s, what the beginning basketball was like, where you have to do everything. You have to be 6'10", but you got to shoot threes. You got to be able to handle, you got to be able to pass. You need to play some defense too. You got to be able to have a good attitude and communicate. So you think, well, the more well-rounded you are as a player, you're actually more valuable. You don't have to be as good at everything. You need to be a more complete basketball player. So we're actually full circle. And you think about society, it's reflective in that same way, where the people who are multifaceted and well-rounded as individuals are thriving now because people want the jack of all trades. They don't necessarily want the master of one,
Yeah.
right? The generalist is thriving.
Yeah. That is a fantastic point because it goes to even the title that you use, transdisciplinary, and we're seeing that taking place in many fields, including basketball, based on how you described it. And well, and I should say that I think when you start looking at our environments, we need a little bit of everything. You kind of need what we call the T-shaped skills, someone who has like deep knowledge, but then has a kind of a horizontal of different skill sets that sometimes we call soft skills, but I don't think that's a word that's never been good to apply for that. But then we're moving towards, like you said, the interdisciplinary, which is really kind of set up like an X, where you have all of these different areas that becomes a key piece of what it means to, and even the ideal of being a polymath, because I do make a difference between polymath and a generalist, but the polymath, these are things that are emerging in the culture now, and I think it's like really cool. So so let's talk about a little bit about how your narrative have become has emerged. So you did play college basketball at a high level, and how were you able to kind of develop your own sense of identity when you are in an environment that is very structured based on some traditional ways of showing up as an athlete?
Mhm. Um, I think it's having a firm understanding and confidence of who you are and not being afraid to stand out in whatever way. And then also like being aware of sort of how people are receiving you and how things are happening and unfolding for you. So like I, through my life, was always excited when I played basketball because the way people received me. They were like, "Whoa, I've never seen somebody play like that. Like, you have some energy about you, or the way you move, or like that's special. Like, you can be something." And I was like, "What is this?" Like, you don't see yourself playing. You just hear how people talk to you. And so all I could do was keep embracing that and say, like, "Okay, cool. Like, there's something that I'm doing that people like. I love that." Like, kind of like in a way people pleasing aspect or like
Hmm. Hmm.
affirmation, positive affirmation. I felt like, as a
Sure.
kid, you're like, oh, this is great. And so then you think, well, if I am getting awards and then I'm, becoming a top player in the state, like when I graduated high school in Oregon, I was a top 5 player in the state in the same year as Kevin Love and Kyle Singler.
Oh
So then you
wow.
think, well, I'm doing something right if I'm on the same par with these guys, right? And then in college, it's crazy at the Division 1 level. There's so much that goes into playing time, into decisions. There's money involved, when it comes to like NCAA makes a lot of money, so they're focused on winning. So if you have to go through your waves of maybe you're not going to be the guy because everybody's the guy at Division One, right? And by the way, I played at Long Beach State for anyone listening. So I had to go through being like losing a lot of games. Like my first year, we were 6-25, which is crazy. And I
But
made
by the way, that's not the first time that's occurred. When and I should share with people, I was at Long Beach State too, and we went 5-25.
wow.
So
Okay, so yeah, so you get it.
yep.
In my sophomore year, and like my freshman year, I did really well, but we lost a lot of games. So we just had a lot of guys who didn't have a lot of Division One experience, right? In my second year, they had a big recruiting class for the freshmen, and then I got basically benched. So I was playing like 8 minutes a game from like 25 plus a game, and so then I had to go through that again, that feeling of like, man, tough year losing, tough year being benched. And then my junior year, I emerged as a sixth man. And the thing that I want to note is that even amidst being benched my sophomore year, I was still like most of my playing time came in key moments of the game. So then I'm like, okay, even though and it was a numbers game, it wasn't my skill. So it was like, even though I'm not being played a lot, when it's someone needs a bucket or a tough play or a defensive stop, they're putting me in the last moments of the game. So then I'm like, well, then I'm valuable. So then I thought about myself differently.
I love it. Yeah.
Right. And then my junior year, I was a sixth man and I had earned the starting spot, but then I had to give it up because another player was better starting than coming off the bench. So then I had to adapt to coming off the bench, even though I was the better player. So then you have to be humble and you have to understand and be selfless and understand the bigger picture. I'm like, this is going to help me at the end of the day because I'm able to adapt and respond to situations and perform regardless of what situation you put me in. So again, my confidence is building, even though my numbers and my minutes are down and out of my control. My senior year, we win the championship and I'm a starter. And I actually played the most minutes per game on the team. And I had the Big West Player of the Year, Casper Ware. He was defensive and the Player of the Year on my team. And I was playing the most minutes on that team. And I was 1,000-point scorer. And I was second all time in threes made as like the third or fourth option, right? So then you're like, well, I don't care what it looks like to people in the locker room, in practice, in this culture, in the basketball world. I got my respect.
Right.
And
So
like I said, I got one more.
please.
One more story that really I think was a solidifier. Was like the things you do. Like Drake says, like you wasn't with me shooting in the gym, right? And I don't mean that to focus on someone else. It's more about like the people who see. And again, to my point about people don't really understand what it takes to become elite in anything you do, but especially sport. Is like I proved to myself my entire life what it took. I was by myself sacrificing things and time and moments to be better at basketball. The amount of hours, I was thinking about like Malcolm Gladwell was like, oh yeah, 10,000 hours to like become an expert or master or something. And I was like, well, I put 100,000 hours in. So then what does that make you? Right. And so that just builds my confidence. So the fact that I put in all those hours and sacrificed so much, improved myself, gave me unlimited confidence. And then the one story that I have that's super funny is, so I don't know I think it was my senior year. We had like our starters and then me and my coach Munson was making a point. He was like, yo, like the only person playing the right basketball is Greg right now. So he put me on a team with all the guys who didn't play against the starters. And they had like one other person. Right. And he said, if this team wins, this team will start in a scrimmage.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
And it's just me as a starter going with these guys who don't play a lot, right? And so I went crazy in that scrimmage and my team ended up winning. And so the lesson there for me was like, you're against all these guys and people have so much belief in you that they'll put you with people who might not look good on paper, but you can elevate everybody around you. And from then on, I earned a different sort of respect amongst my peers and my coaches. And so again, nobody would know that. Nobody would see that. But I know that those are the hours that I put in, the work that I put in personally. So now I walk the world with like each step of the way, you're building this confidence and proving to yourself. And even if it might not look like that in terms of going to the NBA or having these accolades, it's what you do in the hours where nobody sees that really builds you, you know?
Well, I think there's so many nuggets in those stories that you just shared with us. I think one of the nuggets, the big nugget, is that what happens when no one's looking. And so often, in society that we live in now, it's all about immediacy based on what we see flashed into our Instagrams and our social media. I'm glad you really brought up that point. The second thing too is just really about the very interesting ways that a good coach can create environments for people to thrive and to really kind of understand, their level of self awareness. It sounds like your coach really put a challenge out there that sparked you, and I think that's pretty neat. And thirdly, you were speaking about 10,000 hours and Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm did a great job kind of explaining 10,000 hours. But I just want to add that, Malcolm Gladwell's work actually came from, and I'm forgetting the guy's name now, from the author. He wrote a book called Peak. And one of the things that he said, Anders, last name is Anders. And one of the things that Dr. Anders said was that it's just not 10,000 hours, but it's what you do with the 10,000 hours. And part of that is the 10,000 hours that allow for you to fail. And I think one of the things I heard you speaking earlier in your story was putting yourself in situations where there was some failure occurring. And so that's really the missing ingredient when it comes to the 10,000 hours. I just want to kind of really reiterate a great story that you conveyed about how all these things come together. So let's talk a little bit about your travels, because I think that's part of what it means to learn and grow. And your travels were fascinating. You ended up in some pretty interesting places pursuing professional basketball. Can you just briefly share with us what that experience was and what it meant?
Mhm. Yeah. So I was lucky to have the opportunity to play overseas. I started I graduated the NBA lockout year, so I missed basically my first season out of college, which was crazy. So it already kind of started off on a interesting note. And I got lucky to like get invited to go on like a 2-week tour to go to China. And it was in 2012. And that was like my first time being out of the country. And going to China, you don't know what to expect. And so I started, yeah, with that trip. And then through a relationship I built with a Latvian player, he helped me later on get a job in Latvia. So I went from uh, China on a tour for 2 weeks, and then I ended up getting a gig in Costa Rica. And so I played in Costa Rica and won a championship there, and it was a really great season. I was like there for half a season in the summer, and then I went to Latvia from there in Eastern Europe and the Baltics near Lithuania. And after that, I went on another tour, went to Dubai, and after that, I went to Kazakhstan. And so I played in Kazakhstan, and after that, it was like really tough to kind of move from there because the country wasn't and isn't really well respected.
Sure.
And so that gave me time and space to travel, and I was sort of at home, like trying to figure it out for my next contract. And my girlfriend was traveling, and she was like, "Hey, if you're like not playing, like come travel, And so I was like, "All right, well, I really don't have anything to lose," so I sold my car and went to on a one-way ticket to Thailand, and then we
Nice.
backpacked through Southeast Asia, through Cambodia, Vietnam, uh, Burma, and Thailand,
Love
and
Thailand.
yeah, and then I went back to Kazakhstan for a little bit in 2014 or 2015. I think it's 2014. And oh no, early 2015 actually. And then we backpacked through Europe also. So we got to go to like London and Paris and Belgium and Italy. And so, just like, and then in basketball playing, like I got to travel to different countries to play. Like I went to Turkey and, again, Lithuania, Estonia. And so just having that experience of traveling around so many different places and living there and experiencing the culture was so valuable because I got to really understand what other people's perspectives were, not only in their life and their environment, but also how they perceived me and who I was as a basketball player, as an African American, and then also as an American, right? And so there's so many different dynamics at play that it stretches you, and it brings so many gifts that I think I'm still trying to unlock and discover that I took, but it's something that I'll never take for granted. I wish I would have documented more just because that wasn't the culture back then, but I was really
Sure,
living
sure.
but I was really living in the moment.
Well, I saw some pictures. You took some great pictures.
Try
So,
to.
so it's interesting. So you talk about like getting perspective from being both kind of an athlete. You mentioned, being an African American. Like, how were those things? Why was it important to kind of make meaning with those things in your travels? I mean, how did those things end up giving you perspective?
I think that, a lot of times, especially in America, like people have an idea of what the other person is like and or what other cultures are like, and being subjected to like discrimination or racism or anything of that sort, like you realize a lot of it's based on um, unfounded truths, right? Like people made up something, an idea, or they had one experience, or and then decide. And so I was like, man, I need to go and like really try and understand what people are actually like. Like, what is it? What are Chinese people like based on me living there? What conversations can I have to learn about their culture, and not put my subjective thoughts on what they are, but really be open minded and absorb and embrace who they can teach me they are, right? And show me. And it's not that I need to be proven, it's just more like I need to be open and embrace the beauty of life from where other people are living. Like I'm not the center. We're all living and we're all sharing the earth. So why would I ever have an idea about somebody who's in their own existence doing what they need to do to survive, and they have their own culture and everything? Like who am I to say anything about that? Right. So I felt like it was a huge value to go around the world and embrace these learnings and lessons and then share myself, and then be able to come back home and share that with my family or with my teammates or my friends or my peers, and like really see if I can add value as like me based on all these things I've collected.
So, what did it mean to come back to a country that only has about 12% of its population with passports? So,
Wow.
what did it mean to actually to come back here with such a global, expansive perspective? And now you're back in the US, interacting, thinking about a new future in terms of career. I mean, how were you able to kind of, what were you seeing at that time?
I think it reinforced my love for humanity. And not that I didn't have it, but I think sorry, not
Sure,
reinforced. I think it elevated it.
sure.
I, I had my gratitude skyrocketed. Like every bit of empathy and being in touch with my senses, my curiosity, like everything just blossomed, and I felt like, okay, I've been an athlete my whole life and I've focused on performing and giving to others in terms of the team and winning for like an organization. And I've had a passion for being creative, and I've traveled and learned about the stories of others, and it made me think like, how can I come back and lead, use my leadership skills, and then also give and serve and be selfless about the way I approach what I do after basketball. So I tried nutrition, and then I was like coaching and doing private training and trying to like give, kids the gifts that sports has to offer through performance and movement. And then I landed on working in recruiting in a tech company because I wanted to expand um, like what I was actually doing and how I could apply those skills. And I understood like the value of being in a space that you might be uncomfortable in, but like if you stick it out, you can learn so much and grow in that way, right? And so from that, I felt like always focusing on the people was super important. And then, at the pandemic, you get laid off and you're like, all right, what am I going to do next? And at that point, I had started to build my own personal brand and my own little hub for the world I wanted to create called Intellectual Athlete, which you know of. And so that gave me this platform to share the lessons I learned, the findings that I collected, and perspective from the people that I met, and really build a community, but also operate in a way that's like almost doing like an ongoing case study into like the perspective and the mind of like a professional athlete who is seeking more and building from that.
So that platform, first of all, it's a great platform. I love it. I'm a big fan of it. Um, there's many reasons why I love it. Just stylistically, the content, but also it resonates for me because I think as athletes, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, how athletes can be seen as one dimensional. And when I was in college, even in high school as an athlete, I really admired Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and I admired him because it appeared that his story was very similar to mine, in that, well, not at the high skill level, but just
Mhm.
just in terms of his narrative. He went to a prep school that was predominantly white, and he was an athlete, and sometimes he was being pigeonholed, but he had this very powerful intellectual side of him that allowed for him to really show up, more than just the champion that he was. And even to this day, as we see now, he's multiple books into a second life and career post basketball. So I really appreciated that. But I also know that during that time when you were putting together Intellectual Athlete to be kind of a space that held all of these different experiences, you were also really beginning to acknowledge your creative, artistic side. So the manifestation of that began to play a key role in your life. How were you always cognizant of the fact that this was something that had to breathe, or how did that actually come into play and become actualized in your process?
Absolutely. I always had the plan that I would use basketball to like provide a good life and a career financially and take me everywhere I needed to go. But then I was thinking I would become an artist and like a painter or a
Mm,
fine artist or
yeah.
whatever it may be. That was my plan, a photographer. Like I didn't know. And honestly, my whole life, I think this is something that, as a young black man, you would understand. Like you as a black kid, like you're trained to kind of like focus on becoming something like an entertainer or an athlete. Those are the kind of the directions that you get. I wasn't pushed towards, ceramics or writing, you know what I mean? Like liberal arts. Like
Yep.
I didn't take any arts classes. I didn't take any music lessons, but like I always was looking to my left and right at my peers who were, and I wanted that. But, to become a pro athlete, you have to quote unquote, you know, focus because ball is life, right? So I said, that's why I talk about sacrifice. Like I gave up those parts of myself that I felt were like the stronger pullings that actually fueled my basketball career versus focusing so one dimensionally to become that, right? So I think now, since I'm an adult and I have the freedom to like choose what I want to do, everything I'm doing now is in respect and homage to like my childhood self. Like I'm living the dreams that
I
I
love it.
wanted to
Yeah.
as a kid. Like I wanted to dive into photography and illustration, and I always wanted to be an actor. So I'm able to like I was studying like Jim Carrey and comedians, and I was always thinking about, okay, how can I take what they do and hit people, but like be lighthearted about it, and be charismatic about the intention and the way you make people feel when you walk into a room and how you speak. And so I think just being um trying to make sure that and like, you want to be an NBA player. Like if I want to be an NBA player, I can't just be a good basketball player. I have to be able to speak to the media the right way. I have to have a well-rounded skill set of things and think like from a philanthropic perspective of like how I can help others. So, just like understanding that I had the ability to make impact in so many different ways and I had all these different passions, it never left me. And even though I was so focused on basketball the whole time, I made sure that I leaned on the creative inspiration as much as I could to fuel that. And so I never let it go. Right. And so now, now that I transitioned to life after basketball, it was always this feeling of like, how do I get back to that feeling and what is it called? So there's been this level of self-discovery that I've been for the past 5 6 years plus of like trying to figure out what that's called. What career is it called? What skills do I want to learn? How do I learn the skills? Who do I learn from? How do I put myself in an environment to make money doing these things, right? And so luckily through a lot of hard work and good relationships and people who have really supported me a lot, I'm able to now have a career as an art director. And it's funny because this, like as an art director, my job is to be multifaceted, is to have a 360 approach and to not be a specifically skilled person in
Mm,
one way.
yeah,
So you think about it, it's like, and it's visual, right? And I've looked and seen places around the world. I've seen different people, different places, different things. I've been the star player, but I've also been the bench player. I've also been the fan, right? And I've also been able to be elusive and not be seen in these places because when you're around the world, nobody's recognizing you. They don't know who you are. So being able to be in front of the camera, behind the camera, on the court, off the court, like it just gives you this perspective like, oh man, I have, and I talk about empathy because I know how it feels to be in those shoes
sure.
because I failed so many times and I felt so many different feelings and I've talked to so many people about how they're feeling and had to put myself in their shoes of their struggles or their wins and successes. And the main thing that I think that's really stuck through is the people that I've surrounded myself with. I've always surrounded myself with champions. And I don't mean that always literally, but it also is literal too,
Sure.
whether it's Olympians, people who've created companies, founders, CEOs, but also people who are librarians and who work doing nonprofit work or after school programs, or they're the grocery store clerk, right?
What?
Like those
So
people make the most impact too to me.
absolutely. So what are you picking up from those people that you allow to learn from?
Well, I think that's it. I think that I'm open to learning from everybody and everything, and I'm extremely curious about people. So I think what a lot of people do is they think they have to learn from the expert or the person who is known to be something. But I think it's the opposite. I think it's the people that most people don't recognize or that are unseen on a global scale or like a visual level that have the most gems to offer. So it's almost like you're an archaeologist for like cultural knowledge, right? Where you're finding gems in the dust and like, oh wow, this can really elevate me and there's so much value here. And that's what I think the beauty is in exploring, is the fact that I was able to like collect and take information and see the synchronicities in life, the hidden messages that are there,
Sure.
right?
I love it. It's kind of like a combo of ethnography, like, the journey. You're also on a journey, but you're out in the field, so,
Yeah.
you get to learn, you get to do some sense making around the things that are showing up in your world. And at the same time, you get to think about what skills and capabilities that are being constructed in that process.
Mhm.
I think what's so interesting about your story is what you said earlier about that you've never really taken a traditional approach. So I know that you're now holding down positions as an art director with some very large. You've worked for some very large, influential firms, and but that process wasn't about, like you said, going to art school,
Hmm.
doing A and B and C. It was about, which I want you to talk about, partly apprenticeship and a bunch of other things that I would love for you to kind of touch on for a bit. So what was
Yeah,
that? What was that journey like?
yeah. I think it's really about like understanding where the value lies and forming a plan. Like I was super strategic, and you call this the hacking the learning curve is what you brought to my attention. And what I didn't even understand what I was doing was that you're taking experiences and learnings from different areas and translating those into ways that can benefit you in the world or room that you're in now. So I think of myself as like a key maker, right? Like I'm taking information and experiences and knowledge that I've been able to gather, and then making a key to open a door, right? And so then I'm making sure that the things that I've done have value for what I do later. So I'm like, me being able to like take my drive and my experience as a leader and competing at a high level and being able to do all those things I learned in sport, those are valuable in this creative field, right?
Right.
Like I've always had a knack for storytelling and learning about people and psychology and just learning right in that way. And so that's a benefit to my career. And being immersed in living abroad, I can actually speak to those experiences. So those all, and then working in different industries, I've worked in tech, I've worked in like nonprofit and sport and like, so many different areas in nutrition, health and wellness. And so you think like, oh, well, I'm actually able to speak on these things because I've seen those firsthand. So my insights are strong. But then
Sure.
also being into the arts of, movies and film and photography, like you learn from those too. So like I think I pulled from everything and made
Right.
that an advantage. And then, then you figure out how to communicate that to people and then in what way. And then you find like for me visually, I found an aesthetic that I want to I've observed a lot too. Like looking at GQ magazine and Monocle and Kinfolk and um, looking at people who are like in fashion and I've seen people who I've like learned from and wanted to emulate, but then I wanted to create my own version of that. And so, I think that bit of like collecting and trying to understand who you are, you have to have like an elevator pitch. You have to learn how to like communicate. And I've like had so many times where people are like, I don't know what you're like, what do you do? Like, what do you do? And so I had to over time get good at that, right? Like you build. And so there's a lot of failure in that. And so then,
Sure.
at 31, like I worked at tech, in 2018 to 2020, got laid off, and I was like, I want to pursue a creative career with no experience. So then you're gonna have to take some steps back in what people would think. But to me, I was like, I'm going towards the direction. So I did like a social media internship, right? At 31, I was a social media intern for a mobile company working part-time, right? And in that same month, I had ran 100 miles, and it was the first time I ever did that. And so I was like, okay, my mind is open. I'm feeling different. I'm feeling confident, and I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm headed that direction. Opportunities are happening. At the same time, I got an opportunity to do like a mentor and creative program with this agency called Droga Five, and then this broader organization called the One Club. So I got two of those. So I'm like this intern apprentice at 31 trying to get toward this new career. I'm talking to people trying to figure out what it is. I'm like, okay, I'm into all these things. I don't have a specific skill, but like let me figure out based on what I have and like and want to do, what is that career called? So then you keep talking to people and you put those pieces together. And I think that was the start of it. It became a snowball. And
Oh,
then I set the intention also, like I'm not gonna sacrifice my joy to just make money. Like I'm gonna do what I need to as long as I need to get toward this career, right? And then you put yourself in places of learning and you're reaching out to people on LinkedIn, you're creating your own personal work. I think that's extremely important to do your own work. And
so when you say your own work, you're talking about like a portfolio, like developing
yeah,
your own portfolio. Yep.
yeah. So like I talk to people and they're like, if you want to be a creative, you need to put the work out in the world that you want to be doing. So then when people look at your work, they understand where to place you. Or somebody who's interested in that kind of work will gravitate towards you, right? And so then you with these internships and apprenticeships, I was in like a strategy course and then met my creative partner. And then because I had been researching and learning a lot about the creative industry, I understood what agencies were reputable, right? And I understood how that I needed to keep checking on their careers webpage. And so then I found the job opening as an art director, a creative team. And so I think just being extremely diligent about research, learning. I always am in the student. I'm not a student if I'm in action, right? When I need to perform. Otherwise, I'm always the student. So I'm always learning. And so I think the to wrap this up, I would say that my mantra that I've really, I think that stayed true to me is um, emerging from the chrysalis of self-consciousness. So you think of a butterfly and the process that they go through from caterpillar to cocoon, to larva, whatever you want to call it. What do they do inside the cocoon? They literally lose their form, right? And change and evolve into a butterfly. And so you think if you can do that as a person, each step of the way, regardless of if it's every day, every week, every month, every year, every decade, you're always going to be like shedding that old layer of who you were and becoming the better version of yourself. And you just
Love it.
complete that pattern and repeat it. And that's what I've done is just learned, built, and then evolved and let go of who I was and then became something new. And I just keep repeating that. And each step of the way, I keep leveling up. And then at some point, you're like, okay, I found a nice little flow here. I'm making keys. I'm evolving into new forms. I'm always a student. I'm learning. And then now people are coming to me wanting my work. People are coming to me valuing my mind and my journey and my approach. And then now I'm becoming the teacher. And the people who I'm learning from are saying, oh, no, it's time for you to start sharing. It's time for you to start guiding and get on this side of the equation to give back. And so that's
Yeah.
where Intellectual Athlete formed, was that I realized that at some point I'm going to have to share. So I want to create a space that even if it's not a big thing now or it's not expansive, there's a foundation and a seed being planted.
I love it. So, and first of all, thank you for sharing your journey. This is, I think our audience is really going to really appreciate not only just all the nuggets that's in this conversation, but the journey. Um, so you have this journey that has so many different chapters and iterations and
Mhm.
all of these really neat things. So to date, how would you describe or what would you say are your superpowers? The things that when you walk in the door, you know what you're bringing of value to um, to have some type of impact.
I would say empathy is huge for me. Um, I would say I listen. I'm always listening and open to hearing. I'm curious to learn from people. There's one more, and I totally spaced on what it was. Maybe it'll come back to me. But those are the main two that come, or the main three that come to mind. Um, yeah, I'm sorry, I totally spaced out. I had it in mind, but there's one
That's okay.
more. But
I have a
yeah,
couple more
that's
questions for you,
yeah,
so that's
yeah.
fine. So what are some of your own personal performance habits? Like, when you get up,
Oh, I got it.
go for it.
Energy. My
Energy. I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
my energy is my superpower. And my mentor, Brandon Viney, he's a group creative director at Google right now. Really, really brilliant creative and a brilliant person. But he told me, like, the thing that gets you into the room is your energy. He's like, your energy, and not like an excitement energy, but
Sure.
like your positivity, your drive. You have that go-getter mentality. And he was like, that's the thing that's going to get you where you need to go. So even if your skills aren't up to par, the fact that you come into a room and people feel you energetically has transformed the way that my life has been, because now people want to work with you. People are like, you know what? This person might not have the skills at this time, but I'm going to give them the chance. I'm going to bet on them. Right.
I think most people can see the potential in others, and I think they judge that potential based on what you just said. Their energy, their outlook, what they may even perceive in terms of their habits and willingness to learn and soak in information. So I think that is a good way to kind of sum up how all those things, um, how things are pulled towards you. Energy,
Mm.
as we know, it's the unseen and the seen. That really matters. So let's talk a little bit about your performance habits. So you're an ex-athlete, so this is nothing new to you. Um, how what are some of the things that make you, play your game at an optimal level on a daily or even
Mm.
just kind of a professional basis?
I'm gonna go back to being the student. I think students are meant to learn. So, and also I think of myself like the reason I built intellectual athlete was so that I wouldn't have to strip myself of the athlete identity. So I'm not an athlete in terms of performance, but the cultivation of the sport, the creativity, and the identity that I formed helps me become the intellectual athlete, right? So that's the actual, like Kobe had the Mamba mentality. Like I take intellectual athlete as like that's who I am and how it's my alter ego, right? Like I don't become Batman, but I become the intellectual athlete. So if I can put that cape on, it really empowers me. So I would say like for me, always being curious. Like I'm always curious. I'm always collecting information, whether it's on bookmarking things. I'm reading articles. I'm texting and calling people. Figuring out what they're doing. I'm looking to build relationships and network and see how I can grow in my career. Um, in terms of like the creative work I'm doing in my daily job or with intellectual athlete, trying to learn how I can build that and grow that. In terms of how I'm, planning my 2022 like, mission forward to really take that to the next level. And I think it's like consistency of and repetition of like hard work. Like a lot of people don't understand what it means to actually work hard. Like working hard is doing the right hand layup 50 times in 5 different ways. It's not just the right hand layup. It's not just you can't just say, "Hey, I want to do this thing." It's like, are you willing to stay up and work on it into the late night? Are you willing to think about it all day every day? And I don't mean this from a place of like an unhealthy relationship with like work life balance way, but in terms of like it's so exciting and joyful to you that like every part of your life is feeling this thing, right? And I think I I'm never not learning. Like right next to my desk right here, I have books on design. I have sketch paper. I'm looking up on YouTube like what mic is going to help me sound the best on my podcast. Like w- how can I become a better leader? How can I become a better partner to my girlfriend? How can I make sure that I'm um building in the right way? So what I do a lot of times, I think the thing that I do really is like I'm always taking notes, mental notes on my phone, on paper, journaling, like I said, collecting. Um, but I usually, and my girlfriend makes fun of me for this, but she's like, you're pretty like, I'm pretty dormant and I'm observing and I'm slow and I take time to really like hibernate and collect energy to prepare for like a big like push forward. And so I go through waves of operating at a really high frequency where I'm on calls, I'm at coffee getting, thing, I'm networking, I'm staying up till 2 in the morning doing design or whatever it is. I'm on 3 projects at one time, and then it sits still and it's like silent. And that's the time when I think you regroup and like synthesize what you've got and what you've collected, and then wait for the next build. And so I think that wave of like going through highs and lows, and I'm not always going, but 90% of my time is in my mind. I'm making a planning and really building there. And then the 10% is the actual doing.
That is a great point, because your practice is backed up by by the science, which says that the learning really kind of sinks in, not when you're just kind of doing, but when you give yourself a chance to really kind of settle and let things kind of fall in place. And it's interesting because that's what Albert Einstein used to do. When people think of Einstein, they think of physics, but Einstein really saw the physics part of it as just his tools. Um, Einstein was a huge daydreamer, so
Hmm.
he would engage in a lot of activity, but it was really, when he had a chance to, sit or to be somewhere of reflection, that it all kind of came together for him. And that's what he valued. Like that, you know, the theories of relativity, I think that's it. And just all of the things related to his craft was really, from his perspective, secondary to his
Wow.
mind and imagination. So,
You know, that's
yeah.
that's crazy. It makes me think. So I think another thing when it comes to like building confidence is these ways of operating and living and doing, like, I didn't read these things. A lot of these things are learned through trial and tribulation, trial and error, through lived experience. And what happens is what you just did, where people say, "Oh yeah, that reminds me of this person," and I'm like, "Whoa, you just brought up Albert Einstein and this like super like world changing perspective and way of operating." So if I'm naturally or however at some point I've learned to do this in this way, how could I not be extremely confident when people are constantly comparing the way you're doing things to greats like that? And it's not the first time that's happened. And I'm not trying to like pat myself in the back. I'm just saying, like, I'm not a person who's like reading self-help books. I'm not like, studying, like I study podcasts and I listen to people to learn from them, but I actually kind of stay away sometimes. And I think this is a fault of mine from like I have Malcolm Gladwell books, but I haven't read them because I don't want people to think that I'm like taking from him, because I feel like I'm great in my own right, and I've put in the work to like come up with my own mantras. Because
No,
at the end of the day, these
yeah,
people are just taking their findings and building their own philosophies. You know?
absolutely. And I think that is essentially how um, learning and your own development, because we're all engaged in what psychology would call constructivism. That we're no, we're constantly learning new knowledge, but we're also building off of old knowledge. You know, and our job is to bring ourselves into that knowledge where we can create something that's of value and contribution in the evolutionary sense.
Mhm.
And so I'm just like you, man. Like there's a term, I think there was a book written called Still Like an Artist. And so we know that artists do actually
Yeah.
learn things. And actually, even the process of innovation is based on what they call duplication. So we're constantly picking these things up. However, just like you, and it's so apropos to your career and what that process looked like, is that I try not to um, just sign on the dotted line when it comes to the experts or what is said to be kind of like the way.
Hmm.
And so I, just like you, sometimes I will even avoid reading certain things because I don't want it to kind of, what I think, corrupt,
Yeah.
my ability to be original in
Think
my thought
freely.
process, yeah, and think freely. So,
Exactly.
yeah, there's something there that really speaks to the creative process, and so I've really appreciated this conversation and just how you and I have had an opportunity to really kind of build and grow on this because I used to direct a museum, and one of the great things about that experience, which was one of my favorite jobs ever, was that I had a chance to work with creatives, and who were developing exhibits, who were creating media arts, and the process was very messy. And so at some point, you have to really find how to sit in that, but at the same time, develop, some communications and some tools that can help you construct something. And so that's been one of the most valuable moments for me in my career, that's really leading me up to this conversation right now with you. So I want to thank you for this stimulating conversation. And so if you can, just tell us how we can find intellectual athlete out there in the world.
Yeah. Main place is the website. It's theintellectualathlete.com, or Instagram at intellectual athlete. I also write a newsletter, which is probably the what I put the most time in right now, called Controlled Chaos. And so that link to that is on the website, but you can also look on Substack under Intellectual Athlete Controlled Chaos on Google. So yeah, that's those are the main places. Oh, and I'm also for my visual people, I'm on Tumblr under Intellectual Athlete also. So yeah.
Great. So just leaving this, you shared a lot with us, and thank you. But there's going to be college students that are in college looking to get out into the world from their college experience. Can you just kind of leave us with a couple of things that you think that college students should kind of hack their way through or learn or prepare for as they are in college looking to exit into a new journey?
I would say embrace who you are amidst your peers, and um, like be okay with setting a new standard, and then also open space for your peers to explore and be the most themselves and the most vulnerable at who they want to be as well. So when you facilitate a space of community where people can truly be who they are, a lot of people are happier, a lot of people find joy, and then you find opportunity through that. And the relationships you build with other people are going to be the ones that open doors for you later. So make sure that you embrace this time of having time and space to think and feel and do. Don't rush through it. I think college is a great opportunity to learn, of course, but it's also the best time to explore who you want to be. And it doesn't have to be perfect right now. We're all a work in progress, always and forever. So at this time, take your time.